We continue now at the top of Daf Memches Amud Aleph and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 48a. On the previous summit, there was a machlokas amoraim between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said that on a doraisa level, money is not kona. Rabbi Yochanan said on a doraisa level, money actually is kona. It's just the Rabbanan who say that money is not kona. And the Gemara asked a question on Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish who says that money is not kona on a doraisa level. So why is there a misha para? Why is it that a person is cursed, so to speak? If let's say they're going to do a deal, they give the money for the deal, and then they go back on it, we say that there's a misha para. Why is there a misha para if on a doraisa level there's no kinyan at all with money? And so the Gemara answered the reason why there's a misha para is because the person went back on his word, and that's enough for a misha para. The Gemara now is in the middle of asking, is that really enough for a misha para, just going back on your word? But we learned in the Brisa as follows. Rabbi Shimon says, Afal pisha amru talis kona dinar zav. Even though they say that the talis can acquire the golden dinar, meaning to say, as we've said already previously, when you make a kinyan on the object, that creates the kinyan. The talis is the object that creates the kinyan. The ein dinar zav kona talis, but the golden dinar is not able to acquire the talis because the kinyan on the currency, on the money, that's not able to make the kinyan. Mikol makom, nevertheless, kach halacha, even though that is the halacha, aval but they say mishapara me'anshe dor hamabul, me'anshe dor haflaga, or me'anshe Sodom v'amora u'mitzrayim bayom. They say that the one who punished the generation of the Mabul and the generation of the Haflaga and the people of Sodom and Amora and Mitzrayim by the Yamsuf, who asadli para mimisha eno omen b'diburo. He in the future will punish those who do not keep their word. V'hanose v'nosen b'divarim lokan. If somebody does business with words, it's not a kinyan. V'hachozer but if someone retracts, ein ruach chachamim nocha himenu. The chachamim are not pleased with such a person. V'yamar Rav, and Rava says, anu ein lanu ella ein ruach chachamim nocha himenu. We only have this concept that the chachamim are not pleased. We don't have this concept of a mishapara. And we will see Tosas in a moment to see exactly what the question from the Brisa is, but the Gemara answers that Devorim v'ika b'hadayu mos koi ba'avol. If you have words, meaning the person went back on his word, and also there was money given, so then you have the avol, then you have the curse of the mishapara, meaning according to Reish Lakish, who says that money isn't kona, so the mishapara really is for the words, but it's the words together with the fact that money was given, and Devorim v'leka b'hadayu mos, but if let's say the person goes back on his word, but there was no money that was given, so then lo koi ba'avol, so then there wouldn't be the avol, there wouldn't be the curse of the mishapara. And before we see Tosas, we'll take a look at Rashi. Ve'ein dinar zav kona talis. The golden dinar does not acquire the talis. The lagave peiros, that relative to produce or objects, have a dava tiva. The gold is considered to be like money. Mikol makom. Then the language of the Brisa was that even though there's no kinyan, nevertheless, mikol makom kolomar aflafi poranos ha'asida lavo ala choser. Even though there is this punishment that's going to be on the person who does retract, kein halacha she'ein bezin yicholim la'akev biyado. But the halacha is that the bezin can't stop the person from retracting. And then the Brisa said, Ein ruach chachamim nocha himenu. That's by somebody who goes back on their word. So we say that the chachamim are not pleased with that behavior. Ein nachas ruach l'chachmei Yisrael b'ma'isov shel zeh ein daitam nocha aleim himenu al yado. Again, the chachmei Yisrael are not pleased with that behavior. And then Rava said, Anu ein lanu klal acheres. We don't have any other curse. Ela einu hagun be'enei chachamim. We just have that curse that it is not considered to be proper in the eyes of the chachamim. And then the Gemara answered, Koi ba'avol. The Gemara answered that if you have the combination of going back on one's word plus money was given, then you have that avol. Mishum devarim shabo al kach lechlal maisa. The real avol, the real curse of the mishapara is because you went back on your word, but because the word went so far that there even was a deed, that money was given, that's what causes the avol. Avol mos lo kanu midoraisa. But again, money is not a kinyan on a doraisa level. This is within Reish Lakish. And Rashi points out, v'nafka mina. Now the difference over here is le'inyan isura. For example, let's say you have something isser that follows with that money. Let's say you have money that was given from one party to the other, and then there's a question between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish whether on a doraisa level that money really finalized the kinyan. Reish Lakish said that the money is not kona doraisa level. Rabbi Yochanan said it was. So the nafka mina would be in the following case: kagonim kidesh bo eso isha. Let's say the person took that money and used it for a kiddushin for a woman. Rabbi Yochanan have a kiddushin. According to Rabbi Yochanan, that money really is his on a doraisa level. To me doraisa kanya, because on a doraisa level there was a kinyan. V'didehu, so the money belongs to him. Reish Lakish will have a kedushin. According to Reish Lakish, it will not be a kedushin. And Tosas explained, V'yamar Rava anu ein lanu ela ein ruach chachamim nocha heimenu. Rava said that we only have this idea that the chachamim are not pleased with this person's actions. V'yim tomer, so Tosas ask, my kamashmal on Rava, what exactly is Rava teaching us? B'braisa nami hachi katani. The Braisa also says this exact same phrase. The Braisa says that hachozer bo ein ruach chachamim nocha heimenu. It says hachozer bo ein ruach chachamim nocha heimenu, which is exactly what Rava says. And Tosas explained via Shlomo, we can say the Ashmi'inan that Rava is teaching us the ein ruach chachamim nocha heimenu. He means to say that the phrase ein ruach chachamim nocha heimenu, that the chachamim are not pleased with him, lav hainu mishapara de katani bereisha. That's not identical to the mishapara in the beginning of the Braisa. He's trying to say that that is a separate kind of idea. And then Tosas say, Devarim v'ika b'hadayu mos koi ba'avol. This is already the answer of the Gemara. The Gemara answer seems to be a very simple answer, that really the mishapara is for going back on one's word. But if you have going back on one's word combined with the fact that an action took place, that money was given, that really is what causes the mishapara. And so Tosas asks him, Tomar, dekari la mai kari la. So if you're going to ask, well, what was the question in the first place? It seems to be a very straightforward answer. And Tosas' answer via Shlomo, you can say as follows. Dahach Braisa Rabbi Shimon hi. So Tosas notes that this Braisa is authored by Rabbi Shimon. It starts off Rabbi Shimon Omer. And Rabbi Shimon, remember, within Reish Lakish, we said on the previous Amud that according to Rabbi Shimon, Mos are konos on a Doraisa level, according to Rabbi Shimon. The Savar Mos konos afilu Reish Lakish. Within Reish Lakish, even Reish Lakish admits that Rabbi Shimon holds that money is kon on a Doraisa level. Ulakach, and so therefore, Lididei, ki ika Mos kai bavol. That's why, according to Rabbi Shimon, if there is money, so the money is going to cause this avol. That's the idea from the Braisa. Medama l'Reish Lakish de ein mos konos l'Rabbanan l'dvarim below mos l'Rabbi Shimon. And so therefore, the person in the Gemara that was asking the question, the Gemara who was asking the question was saying that according to Rabbi Shimon, what are we saying over here? We're saying within Rabbi Shimon that if money was given, so then there's a mishapara. But if it's just devarim, that's what the Braisa goes on to say, if it's just devarim, so then there is no mishapara, then you just have this idea of ein ruach chachamim nocha heimenu. And so the Gemara was asking, well, if that's the case, so if that's the case according to Rabbi Shimon, so according to the Rabbanan within Reish Lakish, where money is not kona anyway, meaning this whole thing is true within Rabbi Shimon, where money is kona. So if money is kona, so then you have a mishapara if money was given. If there was no money given, then you just have ein ruach chachamim nocha heimenu. So now transfer that over to the Rabbanan. Even if money was given, but the money is not kona, that should be identical to Rabbi Shimon with no money. And so that's why the Gemara was asking, according to the Rabbanan, even if money was given, there should not be a mishapara. At most, it should be ein ruach chachamim nocha heimenu. And then the Gemara answered, no, you really don't make that comparison, because according to the Rabbanan also, the Rabbanan would make that same distinction within Reish Lakish. They would say that if money was given, even though money is not kona, but still the machshava came to a maisa, so to speak, the person went back on his word, and also there was a deed, therefore there would be a mishapara. They would make that same distinction that Rabbi Shimon is making. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Kro masnisa Mesaya leila Reish Lakish, the pasuk and a Braisa support Reish Lakish's position. Rashi explains, Mesaya Reish Lakish, the midoraisa nami lo kanu mos lahedyot, that midoraisa, money is not able to create a kinyan when it comes to a regular person. And the Gemara continues, Kra, where do we see this in the pasuk? Dichsiv, because it's written in the pasuk, Bekichesh ba'amiso, bepikadon, o besasum es yod, o begazel, o ashak es amiso. It says that if there's any kind of denial with an oath of a monetary obligation, we have this idea of carbon shvua. The person has to bring this carbon. And so we have to identify these various denials. And the Gemara says, tesum es yod. What does it mean, tesum es yod? Amar of Chisda says, Kagon sheyichad lo kli lahalva asa. What we're talking about here is a loan. Now, if a person denies a loan, generally speaking, they're not denying specific money, they're just denying that they owe a general monetary obligation, and so that wouldn't really be included in the pasuk. According to Rav Chisda, you shouldn't bring a carbon shvua if you're not denying a specific item. And therefore, Rav Chisda says what it means to sumas yad is it's not just that there was a loan, but there was a specific vessel that was designated to pay back the loan, and the person is denying that specific vessel. He's lying, taking a false oath about that specific vessel, saying that he doesn't owe it, and so that's when you bring the carbon shvua. That's what Rav Chisda is saying, and a similar thing by the phrase ashak es amiso. Ashak says Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Chisda says kagon sheyichid lo kli la ashako, that there was a kli, there was a vessel designated for ashako, refers to the wages. The person is claiming wages. There was a specific kli that was supposed to be given to be paid as the person's wages, and then there's again this false denial, you bring the Karban Shvuah. So that's how Rav Chisda understands the pasuk. We always have to be talking about a specific object. And the Gemara now continues. Now when the pasuk goes back and talks about the fact that you're returning whatever it was that you denied that you stole, so ksiv, so it's written in the pasuk, V'haya ki yechet v'ashem, v'heishev es hagzela asher gazal, o es ha'oshek asher oshak, o es ha'pikadon, asher hafkad ito, he returns whatever he stole, he returns the wages, he returns the deposit, v'ilu tesumas yad lo ahadri, but it doesn't mention anything about tesumas yad. And my time, and what's the reason? Why is that not mentioned? Lav mishum de mechasr meshicha. It's to teach you this exact idea, that if you don't have a meshicha on the vessel, just giving the money, let's say by lending the money, you don't acquire the vessel, and so therefore it's not enough. That's why the pasuk doesn't repeat it. The pasuk is essentially saying it's only going to be considered a denial if the person actually made a kinyan on the vessel, did a meshicha. So then if the other party denied it, then you can have Karban Shvuah. And Rashi explains, Tesumas Yad Halva, again, Tesumas Yad refers to a loan. V'yamar Rav Chisda said, Kegon sheyichid lo halo v'kli aleh. It has to be a case where the borrower designated a specific vessel to pay back with. To have idumya de pikad, and then already it's similar to a deposit. Ilu kafar b'halva gredos, if the person simply denied a loan, lo mechayev Karban Shvuah, there would not be any carbon brought, there would be no Karban Shvuah, hoel v'nitna lahotzah, because money could be spent. It's not a specific enough denial. And Rashi continues, Ashak schar sachir, again, Ashak refers to wages, and that also, sheyichid lo kli la ashako, there was a designated kli for paying those wages, v'ilo lo mechayev akvir schar sachir, Karban Shvuah, if it wasn't designated, again, if you deny those wages, there's no Karban Shvuah, to lo miyachid le be'apei nafshei kepikadon v'gezel ve'aved, because again, it's not a specific thing that's designated like a deposit, like a stolen object, like a lost object, it has to be a specific item. And when the pasuk talks about returning the object after the person admits, he sinned, he's guilty. Now, why don't we talk about the loan that specifically? Because there was no mashicha, there has to be mashicha as well, meaning oso kliva lo kana malva, the malva has to make a kinyan, and the money alone did not create the kinyan. And so the Gemara continues, Amarle Rapapa l'Rava, Rapapa responds to Rava, maybe it's not a proof from the Pasuk, because Ema Meyoshek hu dahadar kra, maybe the reason why the Pasuk didn't mention Tesumas Yad, they didn't repeat Tesumas Yad, is because they already repeated Oshek, and essentially it's the same thing. Rashi explains, Me Oshek de ahadre kra, mikeva de ahadre kra la Oshek. Once the Pasuk already repeats the idea that he's returning the Oshek, he's returning again whatever vessel was designated for the wages, the Mechaser Nami Mashicha, now that also was missing Mashicha. So lo itzrich la aduri la Tesumas Yad, we don't need to then also repeat the Tesumas Yad, to Meyoshek Neilafle, we can really learn it out from there. Maybe it has nothing to do with the fact that you have to do a Mashicha on the object. Maybe you don't have to do the Mashicha on the object, and once we already mentioned Oshek, so you don't have to mention Tesumas Yad as well. And the Gemara continues in response to that, Hacha b'mayaskin, and it could be by the case of Oshek, what are we dealing with? It's not true, really money is not Kona, but by the case of the Oshek, it happened to be that the person actually did lift up the object, and therefore it essentially became like a deposit. As Rashi explains, when the pasuk goes back and mentions Oshek, what happened was that the worker actually took that vessel, the chazar v'ifkidu etzlo, he made a kinyan on it, then he gave it back to the person who was supposed to pay the wages, and that's exactly what the pasuk is saying. The pasuk is saying again, you need to have a mashicha. Mos is not kona. That's why Oshek was repeated, but that's not what happened by the case of Tesumas Yad, and that's why Tesumas Yad is not repeated. And again, the pasuk would then indicate, like Reish Lakish, the pasuk would indicate that there needs to be a Mashicha. And so the Gemara says to that, but if that's the case, Hainu Pikadon, but isn't that the same as Pikadon? If the case of the wages is that there was a specific Kli that was designated, the worker actually made a kinyan on the Kli, then he gave it back as a Pikadon, that's just a Pikadon. The Gemara says, well, Trei Gavni Pikadon, that's true, it's just two kinds of deposits that are mentioned in the pasuk, and again, the pasuk is talking, it is a support for Reish Lakish, it's talking where there was a Mashicha, because a Mashicha is required. But the Gemara says that if you're going to go to that extent to understand what it means Oshek, so if so, Tesumas Yad Nami. So by the Tesumas Yad as well, you could have said the same thing. Lahadre, let the pasuk repeat Tesumas Yad. V'look, make a gon, shenad lo hemenu v'chazer v'ifkidu etzlo, and say that's the case also. The case is that we're talking about Tesumas Yad, and we're talking about it specifically was designated, and a Mashicha was done, and then after the Malva did the Mashicha, he gave it back to the Lova, and now it's a Pikadon, and so again, it could be the exact same case. Why not repeat Tesumas Yad? And so the Gemara explains that's exactly what we're saying. Yahadre kra, if the pasuk would have repeated everything, anything. They would have mentioned Oshek, they would have mentioned Tesumas Yad. So lo tiyufta velo siyata, you'd have no refutation, you'd have no support, you wouldn't be able to derive anything because you wouldn't know if the reason why there's a carbon shvu is because Moses is Kona, or if there was a Mashiach done and this essentially became like a Pikadon. You'd have no idea what's going on. But Hashta de Loa Hadrekra, but now that the Pasuk did not repeat Tesumas Yad, but it did repeat Oshek, so now you understand why we're making distinctions. Mesayale, so now you actually have a support for Reish Lakish, and again, the idea is that the reason why one was repeated and one was not is really just to tell you this idea, to tell you that you need to have a Mashiach. And the Gemara says, Tesumas Yad Lo Hadrekra, but is it really true that Tesumas Yad is not repeated? Vatanya, but we learned in a brayso. So Rabbi Shimon says, Minayin litenes Amar lamala lamata. How do we know that whatever was said above in the pasuk is really should be applied below? Tichsiv, as it's written, Omi kol asher yishava olav lasheker. It says anything that you take a false oath about. So really, it is repeated because it's included in that generalization. V'yamar Rav Nachman Amar Rabba bar Avu Amar Rav, and Rav Nachman said that Rabba bar Avu said that Rav said l'rabos tesumas yad laheshavon. It's to include this idea of tesumas yad. You also have to return that again in whatever situation, whatever scenario we're talking about. That's what the Gemara now says. Behed yomiyah lo ahadrikra. Yeah, but the pasuk didn't mention it specifically. It's just included in the generalization, and so therefore, again, we are learning out like Reish Lakish. We're saying there has to be an actual kinyan, an actual mashicha, and only then do we say that there's going to be a carbon shvua. And Rashi explains, Yihachi demai dahadrikra mukmis bedlo mechusar mashicha. If you're going to say that which the pasuk repeats, you're going to say it's not missing mashicha. There was a kinyan. Nihinami de mashicha bein, and so granted you need Mashicha. Lahadri kranami l'tesumas yad v'nukma b'hachi. Let the pasuk also repeat tesumas yad and say that there was a Mashicha. And so then the Gemara answered, Yahadri kra lo have gamrin and lo tiyufta v'lo siyat. If the pasuk repeated that, so you'd have no proof, you'd have no refutation and no proof. The Rabbi Yochanan lukma b'dlo mashach. Rabbi Yochanan would simply say the psukim are talking where there's no Mashicha because the money is kona. Reish Lakish lukma b'shamashach, and Reish Lakish will say you have to do a Mashicha because again money is not kona according to Reish Lakish. But hashta the lo ahadri misayeli. Now that they don't repeat tesumas yad, you actually have the support for Reish Lakish. From the fact that the pasuk repeats Oshek, Pikadon, Gezel, and Aveda, v'lo ahadri l'tesumas yad, but does not repeat tesumas yad, equal amelef tesumas yad b'mechusar mashicha v'oshak kishem mashach. You can say tesumas yad there was no mashicha, and then when it talks about oshak, that's talking where there was a mashicha, and you can have a proof for Reish Lakish. And that's what the Gemara eventually concluded. Behed yomiyah lo ahadri kra, that explicitly it was not repeated. Sheyeh chayev lashivu. It doesn't say again specifically tesumas yad at the end. It's just a generalization. It doesn't say specifically tesumas yad has to be returned, ulahavi carbon, and to bring a carbon. V'chihada rab yikran. So therefore, when the pasuk goes ahead and does include it within the generalization, dumya de pikadon ravi, it has to be similar to pikadon. B'shenat lo heimenu v'chazar v'ifkidu etzlo. Again, when he took it from him and then gave it back to him as a deposit, those are the cases. It's only in that kind of scenario where you're going to have a carbon shvua. And the Gemara continues, Masnisa Minolan, where do we have a brisa that supports Reish Lakish? The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, Nosna lebalan mal, if a person gives money of hektish to the balan, which means to the bathhouse attendant, so just by giving the money, there is me'ila. V'yamar Rav, and Rav says, Dafka balan, who it's specifically by a bathhouse attendant, the lo mechsar mashicha, there is no mashicha, there's nothing to pull. You're just giving the money in order to get into the bathhouse, so there we say that the money would be a kinyan, so to speak, and would be considered me'ila. Avol midi achrisa, but if it would be something else, the mechzer mashicha, where a mashicha could be done and you're missing the mashicha, lo moal ad mashach, there would not be meila until the person actually does mashicha, and so that's a proof to Reish Lakish that again mashicha is what is used for the kinyan and not the money. But the Gemara continues, Vatanya, but we learned in a brisa, nasna l'safar mal, then let's say he gives the money, this is money of hektish, to a barber, it's also meila. V'safar haboilam emshach tasporas. Now when it comes to the barber, there is something that you could do mashicha on. He would be able to do the mashicha on the scissors, and so therefore you see that really money is kona, and you don't need to do a mashicha. So this seems to be against Reish Lakish. And the Gemara says to that, Hachav Mayaskin, and the Gemara says here in this brisa, what are we talking about? Besafar Nachri. We're talking about a barber that is not Jewish. The Lab Bar Mashicha, the concept of mashicha only applies by Jews. It does not apply by non-Jews, and that's why by the case of the barber who's not Jewish, there would be me'ila immediately upon giving the money. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Nami Hachu, we have a brisa that supports this as well. The brisa says, Nasna l'safar or l'safan or l'chol b'alayomnas. If the person gives the consecrated money to a barber barber or a sailor or any professional, lo mal ad mashach, there's no me'ila until there's a kinyan, until there's a mashicha. Now here we have by a barber that you have to do mashicha. Before we said by the barber that you don't have to do the mashicha. So kash and adodi, so it seems to be a question, one brayso against the other. Elalav shmamina kan b'safar nachri, kan b'safar Yisrael. Rather, don't we see from here there's a distinction between a barber that's a non-Jew, by a barber that's a non-Jew just giving the money is me'ila, because there's no mashicha by non-Jews, but by a barber that's Jewish where there is mashicha, so then there has to be mashicha for there to be me'ila, and the Gemara says shma mina, indeed we see that that is the case. And Rashi explains, Nasna lepruta shel hektish b'shogeg. Again, a person takes a pruta of hektish and by mistake he gives it lebalon. He gives it to the bathhouse attendant b'schar shir chetzenu b'beis hamerchatz, so he can use the bathhouse. Mal v'yapapish adayin lo rachatz. It's going to be me'ili even though he didn't actually use the bathhouse. He never bathed. V'yamar Rav garsin and dafka balin. And Rav said that it's specifically by a bathhouse. Katani demal hanos, and we say that the person who gave it committed me'ila mishum deschiras gemurahi b'nesinas hapruta, because just giving the money is considered to be that he's essentially paying for what needs to happen. At that point in time, there's no retracting, because there's nothing to pull, there's nothing to make a kinyan on, so that finalizes the deal. But let's say he gives the money for something where you could do a mashiach on an object, there'd be no me'ila, it would not be considered the misuse of consecrated money until he actually does mashiach. But he does need to do the mashiach, meaning talking about by the case of the barber, there you need to take the scissors, because if you have something that you can do mashicha on, you should do the mashicha. And the Gemara answer to that, when we're talking about the barber nachri, we're talking about a barber that's not Jewish. Lo shaykh beidin mashicha de miyad amisecha. If it says miyad amisecha, amisecha means somebody from your nation. It means a Jewish person. There's no idea of mashicha by a non-Jew. Kashina hadadi safar asafar. The Gemara said we have a contradiction, barber against barber in terms of the two brises. And then the Gemara eventually answered that there's a distinction between a barber that's not Jewish again and a barber that is Jewish. And the Gemara continues, V'chein amar Rav Nachman. Likewise, Rav Nachman says, like Rav Yochanan, that Devar Torah Mos Konos, that on a Doraisa level, money does create a kinyan. Ubod kol Levi b'masnise v'ashkach, and Levi searched in the Bryce and he found Nasna l'siton mal, that if a person gives the money to a siton, and that refers to a wholesaler, so then the person has committed me'ila, again talking about consecrated money. And Rashi says, Uvod kol Levi b'masnise higiav hosifa b'tosefta, means that he edited and added it to the tosefta, shasider v'shanaba, that he arranged. Now they note within Rashi seems to say that Levi essentially amended this into the tosefta, whereas in the actual wording of our Gemara, it says, ve'eshkach, he found a brisa that says that. It could be Rashi didn't have the word ve'eshkach in his Gemara. In any case, Levi said, Nasna l'siton mal. Levi either amended the brisa or found the brisa which said that Nasna l'siton mal, siton chenvani gadol, a siton is a large storekeeper, essentially a wholesaler. Umocher peros harbe lechenvanim aniyim, he sells a lot of produce to poorer storekeepers. V'nosnin lo hamos al yad keshem mocher, and then they give the money little by little as they sell what they need to sell. Uvetchilas hakniya nosin a ravon damim muatan ala kol. At the beginning, they just give a little money for everything. They don't have the money right away, and so therefore, as they sell, they continue to pay back the wholesaler. And so again, it's said over here that if he gives this money that's consecrated money to the siton, so then mal, that's me'ila afal gavdelo mashach kol haperos, even though the storekeeper did not do mashich on all of the produce, sharei harbe posik imo bebasachas, because there was a lot that he's giving him at once, and so we see that just the giving of the money alone is me'ila. That's how we see this idea of Devar Torah Mos Konos, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Memches Amud Beis.